Today is April 23rd, 2014. This is Brent Björkman with the Kentucky Folklife program, and I'm here at Mammoth Cave, continuing the interview series that I'm doing with park rangers. We're talking about working lives in the Park Service, and today I'm with another guest. We're about to start. Can you tell me your name and your current position?
My name's Eddie Wells, and I'm currently the Volunteer and Partnerships Program Coordinator for Mammoth Cave National Park.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got connected to this area, to the Park Service? That's kind of how we've been starting.
Okay, well, I grew up here. I grew up only about 14 miles outside of the park. A family friend was a ranger and eventually the general foreman of maintenance. And he helped me to get my first job here in 1980 with the old Young Adult Conservation Corps. And I did anything from picking up litter along the roadsides to doing maintenance, for the most part, down inside the cave. They just reopened the Echo River Cave Tour in 1980, so they put me down there because they knew I was interested in the cave, and it basically blossomed into me becoming a seasonal cave guide. I was going to Western Kentucky University at the time, and so I thought, what a great summer job. Well, it's only about a month I decided I wanted to be a national park ranger, and it was a huge career choice.
So what were the steps after? Did you get your degree and then go on with the hoops you had to jump?
Well, when I was in college, there would be positions come open. I'd apply for them, and I was going to try to go to school, finish my degree, and work permanently. And so finally, when I did graduate in the fall of 1984, it was the next year I was offered my first permanent position, and it was here at Mammoth Cave as a permanent part-time law enforcement ranger, which I was interested in law enforcement. And so I was here for a year, and then I transferred away to another national park, Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. And they sent me to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, where I obtained my full law enforcement commission, and that basically really started my law enforcement career. And I worked a total of 6 other parks before transferring back here in 2000.
What parks were those?
I was at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, Everglades National Park, Cape Hatteras National Seashore, Arkansas Post National Memorial, Vicksburg National Military Park, and then finally Homestead National Monument in Beatrice, Nebraska. And a buddy of mine said, hey, we've got a job open here at Mammoth Cave. It's the first time a permanent law enforcement job had been open in years. And I thought, I got to go for this. And so I put in for it, and like the 3rd day of January of 2000, they said, come on back home. And so here I am ever since. And I did law enforcement until June 2008.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about law enforcement. Seems like it was a real mainstay of a lot of your career. I know it's been evolving and continues to do so, and we can talk about that in a moment. But tell me a little bit about the process of those first couple of weeks when you started as a green law enforcement person, and then maybe talk about how your duties have changed and how that's progressed over time.
I remember when I started out, when I first got my commission, at that time Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park was one of the highest level law enforcement parks in the southeast region. And I had a wonderful supervisor and mentor. His name's Jim Staub, and he took me under my wing, and for the first 2 weeks after I had my commission, I rode with him for like the first 3 days and watched him real close on how he did stuff and compared it to what I was taught in my training. And then finally one day we went out to the patrol car, and he says, you're driving. And so we went out there and we drove around, and you know, I'd make traffic stops and everything, and he's saying, now don't write a ticket just yet. And then finally one day he says, okay, let's go. I want to see you in full action. And so we went out, and within about 30 minutes I had my first real traffic stop with a ticket, and he said, okay, that's good enough. Take me back to the ranger station. You carry on. And so after only about 2 weeks of what you might even consider a rudimentary field training, I was thrown right to the wolves. But I learned, and I really learned a lot in my training, and I was pretty safe. But back then, it wasn't as it was always dangerous, but I think it's really evolved over the last 20 years because I've got 20 years in law enforcement. And back then, my gun belt only weighed about maybe 7 or 8 pounds. By the time that I left law enforcement, between my gun belt and my armor, it probably weighed around 25 pounds with all the equipment that we had to carry. So, but it was needed because people have seemed to have gotten, in some ways, a little more violent, there's more potential, I think. People's attitudes have changed towards law enforcement in the National Park Service. It's a pretty dangerous profession. A lot of people think that we're the soft, fuzzy, they're not going to do anything sort of individuals, but our training has evolved to where we're more proactive. We have to be more cognizant of officer safety much more these days. And so you have a wide variety of gear that you have to deal with, and unfortunately some people get shown why we're trained the way we're trained.
Well, that's interesting, and that's come up with some of your law enforcement colleagues that I've interviewed. I think Pete Zart was talking about, people do think you're a certain way, or they don't understand you're a real law enforcement officer.
Mm-hmm.
The public perceptions are created, and I'm not sure why they're that way. Do you have any ideas about why people think that?
I think it's from the old Lassie movies where, I think it was Corey the Forest Ranger and Lassie would go out and take care of all kinds of things. I think it's also from the Smokey the Bear commercials, seeing this big cuddly teddy bear, and they think we're all like that. And there was a time when Rangers could be more like that. But unfortunately, the law enforcement Rangers, we've had to toughen up and rise to face the occasion because we deal with drug traffickers, dangerous motorcycle gangs. I've dealt with arson investigations, child pornography, sexual assaults, robberies, burglaries. National Park Rangers, we have the authority to investigate every federal violation that occurs within a national park, and we have to be prepared for that.
So is that, you were talking about the evolution of both societal change and training, kind of running, I don't want to put words in here, is it kind of hand in the same kind of time period maybe, and how has the training changed? I was talking to one law enforcement officer in Tennessee who did a lot of interp for a good bit of his career. In his 40s, he went to the academy. Mm-hmm. And he said, I had to learn how to see things completely different than you see things.
I did too.
Can you talk about that at all? Or?
Well, sure. When I started out, the basic police course for land management agencies was 9 weeks long. There was no field training, except what you got when you got your commission when you got back to your park. Now the training is somewhere around 18 to 20 weeks, followed by an 11-week field training period, which is definitely a pass-fail. You are put in with a field training ranger in real-life situations, and unfortunately, some people don't make the grade. It shows whether they have the wherewithal, the mettle, the intelligence, the aggressiveness, the physical prowess to be able to do this job. And here at Mammoth Cave, I was the first field training lead. Here, I was one of the first 19 field training leads in the National Park Service. We 19 were all trained at the same time down at FLETC, and so it was a pretty proud moment when I came back here to start setting up the program, and I supervised 4 of my former colleagues as field training rangers. And we had to, it was tough. We would have to counsel trainees. It wasn't just a rubber stamp thing. They had to come out here and prove that they knew what they were doing. So it's, as society has changed, the training has become much more demanding than what I went through, much more demanding.
Mm-hmm. I'm even seeing can you tell me for the record, I've heard it a couple times and I did not inquire, FLETC.
Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. That's an acronym. Park Service people tend to use a lot of acronyms.
Sure. Sounds like you've seen a lot of things and all these different. But do you have any stories that are maybe informative to thinking about how you've been informed by the job and what you've learned, or something you've taken pride in assisting with? Maybe it's just an individual's education, a park visitor's education, or something you help to provide greater safety in a traumatic situation, or
Well, as a park ranger, not only are you law enforcement, you also do emergency medical services, search and rescue, hazardous materials, and several other things. And I think two of the most profound things that stood out in my mind was when I was I was also the EMS coordinator, emergency medical service coordinator here, before my colleague Brian Sasha took that over. And I was able to get an epinephrine administration program started. This is for people who have severe allergic reactions, and we'd gotten signed off by a medical doctor, and within about 1 week of us getting our EpiPens, I was in fact instructing an EMS class here. I was an EMT, and I got a call from the ferry operator that there was a car coming across the ferry. They had an 11-year-old girl who was in anaphylactic shock. And I had one of my colleagues to stop her. I ran out of class, ran over there. There they were. The girl was obviously in anaphylactic shock. I told the mother who I was, what I had, what I was wanting to do. And she said, do it. And I gave her the shot. And it was almost like you could see this young lady start to deflate. The swelling was going down. She started breathing easier. Had an ambulance coming. And when it was all over with, I was like, wow, I made a difference. And then the same thing happened about a year later. The funny part about that is the girl, her parents, one was a doctor, one was an RN, and they didn't recognize anaphylactic shock. I had to tell them, your daughter's in anaphylactic shock. If I don't give her this shot, she could die. And is it that serious? I said, yes, it is that serious. The father came up after we had loaded her onto the ambulance, and he said, what's going on? I said, your daughter's in anaphylactic shock. They're taking her to the medical center in Bowling Green. I didn't think it was that bad. So sometimes park rangers, I'm not putting down doctors at all, but sometimes they don't have the field experience that we do to recognize some of these emergency situations. And I could tell the girl was in shock from about 25 yards away as I drove up because her head looked like a basketball. So again, making a difference.
And thinking about that particular EpiPen, I mean, we're here in the nature with these toxins, more so. So,
oh yeah,
how great to take the lead on something like that.
Yeah, it was a real point of pride for me that we were able to get this program started, and had a lot of cooperation from park management. They supported it, and after we saved that first one, it was like, how much more money can we give to you to buy more pens? You need a replacement, don't you? Oh yeah, I need a replacement. Right. But there's been a lot of things in law enforcement.
So you mentioned nefarious individuals, and I'm not trying to sensationalize it, but I think something for the record might be this very fact that you're sharing with me, that there are things, situations that you have to deal with, and I think those kind of stories are engaging if those are something you want to share.
I'm going to say probably...
And it can be at this park, or it can be at all those other parks. You have such a wide range.
Well, this one actually occurred in Everglades National Park, which is in the South Florida. When you think of South Florida, you think of drug trafficking and drug runners and the whole 9 yards. You think of the Drug Enforcement Administration, U.S. Customs. One day there was a training course going on in the park, and just about every ranger in the park was sent to this training. And the district I was in, the Flamingo District, is 500,000 acres in size. It's 95% water, We patrolled by regular patrol boats. We didn't have the airboats down there. That was in other parts of the park. And they only left 2 of us rangers, one to run the roads and me to run the backcountry in my patrol boat. And so...
For how many days?
It was for 5 days. Me and Mike McGinnis were by ourselves. And so what we decided to do so that we could mutually back each other up was to stay on land unless we got called out to the water, because otherwise there would have been no backup. I was at the marina store. I heard radio traffic, and it was a DEA fixed-wing airplane that was flying over the Shark River area. They saw 2 sailboats anchored nearby with a small dinghy running back and forth between them. And they profiled this as probable cocaine offload operation. And that was a very common practice. A lot of drugs came through Everglades National Park. So me and Mike, we get our automatic weapons. We had automatic rifles, shotguns, you name it, body armor, the whole 9 yards. And so we get in my patrol boat and we're heading up towards Shark Valley, or Shark River, which was like 20 miles out into the backcountry. And the only other ranger that was in mutual support was up at Everglades City, about 40 miles away. And so we told dispatch, have him start rolling down this way. And as we're getting closer, dispatch came on the radio and said, do you want us to summon the U.S. Customs Interdiction Team helicopter? And I said, bring them on. I want guns. And so by the time we got on scene, we went into what we call a high-risk boat takedown configuration. 2 boats approaching from the fantail, staggered. And we got on loudspeakers, said, get everybody on the fantail, hands up, hands on your head, nobody moves. About that time, the Customs Black Hawk helicopter comes in. They're circling overhead about 150 feet. The doors were open, and you saw 8 guys with their .308 caliber Steyr machine guns all pointed right down at that boat. And the people on board said, what's going on? I said, you tell me. I said, you twitch, they'll rake this boat. I said, do you understand me? Yes. Good. We're boarding you. And we did not find any sign of drugs, but there was a couple of guns and some other stuff. And we ran them. Everything came back, but when it was over with, we all met up far away outside the area of operation, and we all just about collapsed because our adrenaline was just we were so fired up and wired and focused on what we were doing, and it was incredible. Some good times with that down at Everglades. I got to go aboard Marine One, the president's helicopter, when the first President Bush came to visit. The pilot, the commander of VF-1, the Marine detachment, took us on board and said, don't take any pictures, but said, this is where the president sits and all that. That was cool. So there's been some fun times go along with the scary times too.
Right. And putting your training to use. I mean, that possible drug situation was,
mm-hmm.
Wow. Oh
yeah. There's been times had to wrestle people to get them handcuffed. That's really tough to try to fight somebody and keep them away from your gun at the same time. I've dealt with child pornographers, just all kinds of stuff. There's a lot more. There's more. What goes on in culture outside the park in society happens inside the parks too. People don't realize that. It does.
They think everyone's on vacation and they've left whatever they are outside, but
that's it, and that's the attitude a lot of them have too. You'll find car doors unlocked with purses inside. That led to me. I was one of the only national park rangers to ever testify in a federal death penalty sentencing, and it started with 2 individuals breaking into cars, and it led to a multi-state crime spree that these 2 people, this one guy and another guy went on, and they murdered people while they were out and about on their spree. And so I was called in to testify when it was all said and done, and right now they're on federal death row. And that was something to be able to tie the crimes at Mammoth Cave National Park into this crime spree.
Mm-hmm. So partners are really important. Your team within the park is pretty important too.
Yes, it is, inside and outside.
Mm-hmm. You probably have a special bond. You think the bond is different between the law enforcement? I'm not sure if this is a stupid question, but the law enforcement team. I've heard camaraderie stories in all aspects of park ranger work.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, from your estimation, is it different? How is it different? You know, how do you work as a team? It sounds like it's a special bond.
It is a special bond, but I want to just say it's just law enforcement rangers. I think throughout the entire park there's a bond there that we've got a common mission to protect, preserve, to interpret, to manage, and it is common. But I think that when you're a law enforcement ranger and you've faced dangerous situations, traumatic situations, where you've maybe saved lives or maybe you've made a major arrest or something, and everybody comes together as a team, it tends to bond the unit together much more so. Me and my former partner in law enforcement, we're very close friends to this day.
You mentioned before you've worked at a lot of different places, and you're from this area,
Mm-hmm.
kind of returning here. So you've experienced the cultures, park cultures, in a wide variety of instances. How is Mammoth Cave? How are they different? Maybe how is Mammoth Cave different? Again, I don't want to make this entire thing about Mammoth Cave, but being here with Mammoth Cave people, it is a very specialized kind of place.
It is. As far as in the different parks, the culture in each one, it varies. I'm going to say probably the camaraderie at Chickamauga was very close to this. It was, I think, even tighter down at Everglades because down there the park itself is 1.5 million acres. And our rangers are so spread far and wide, and they're so good at what they do that even I was in a Flamingo district, there might be rangers in a Tamiami district, and I might be called on to go up and help them, and it was just like hand in glove. You know, you knew what to do because we were all on the same team, and it was very close. In other places it's not been like that. Other places been very tight. It really depends upon the tempo of the management, what they expect, what they want to accomplish. We go out and accomplish what they need us to.
Mm-hmm. So some management you agree with more, and some is it's not as helping people be more cohesive or
right.
Mm-hmm. One thing I haven't asked law enforcement folks is, what's a typical day like? I tried it one time and it really didn't work very well.
Oh gosh, I'll tell you why it didn't, because there is no typical day. The thing is when you come into work, here at Mammoth Cave we have take-home vehicles. So when you got out to your vehicle at your house, you were on duty. You could come into work and maybe not one thing happen. You might have maybe one verbal warning. Or you might be drawing your gun and taking somebody down at gunpoint. You never knew. So when you came in, you had to have the mindset, is this the day? And you also had to have the mindset, I'm going home at the end of this day too. If a bad guy doesn't, that's his problem. I'm living. They may not. Mm-hmm. And so you had to have that mindset. You had to be ready to fight all the time. And so that's a little hard on you mentally and physically because you're at a higher level of preparedness than you would be if you had an office job. So I'd have days that were extremely slow. It just about put you to sleep, followed by a day of absolute terror, and you run yourself ragged. So it's hard to say.
Did that get tiring after a while? I know that maybe we can talk a little bit about your current position, and that's your time with the Park Service has changed over time. So law enforcement into, why was that decision made to go forward into a different capacity?
Well, wasn't necessarily a very voluntary thing. What happened was I was having, in my 20th year, I was having neck problems. And so, long story short, wound up going to a neurosurgeon and said, we have to operate. And so after my neck was operated on, I went back to him for a fitness evaluation, fitness for duty evaluation. And again, he said, now, do park rangers do police work? And I said, well, yes, sir, we do. Do you wrestle people? Yes, we do. Well, you don't need to be doing law enforcement anymore. You could be put in a wheelchair. You could be crippled for the rest of your life. And so he wrote up a report. He sent it to the park. And fortunately, my position I'm in now was open. And instead of having to take a disability retirement, I was able to actually come into this. And the advantage is I've had finally had, after 20 years, a Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30 schedule. Whereas as a ranger, about 2/3 of my year was working at nights, holidays, and weekends. And the other third was day shift. And there was a lot of time away from the family.
So your current job today entails what kinds of elements?
Well, broadly, I'm the coordinator of the Parks Volunteer Program. I work with recruiting and helping to select volunteers to work in the different divisions of the park. And volunteers can do anything except law enforcement. That's a federal mandate. They can do pretty much anything you want them to. I work with a lot of volunteer groups. I work with scouts, that sort of thing. I'm also the Parks Agreements Officer. And in that role, I'm responsible for all the cooperative agreements like between Mammoth Cave and Western Kentucky University, the University of Kentucky, and other sorts of entities. The Cave Research Foundation, the National Speleological Society. So I have to formulate all these agreement packages. I'm also involved with cultural resource management. I work with as a liaison with the museum management program here. I deal some with archaeological management, historic structures, cultural landscapes, history, the cemetery program. I'm the co-liaison with the 7 affiliated tribes associated with Mammoth Cave National Park. And on top of that, I'm one of 3 requisitioners for the park. What our role is when somebody needs to buy something that's, say, over $3,000, we're the one that has to cut the orders for it. And so I stay pretty busy a lot.
Wow. That's amazing. So it's satisfying in a different way? Or
It is. It's great when you got some really cool volunteers in and they come out, and volunteers do make a difference. And they come out, they've done something, and they're like, wow, this was fun. Thanks for letting me be a ranger for a day, or something along those lines. And although it's not paid, they're certainly appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about Harry Yount.
Harry Yount.
And the Harry Yount Award.
Oh wow! So I guess my colleagues must have told you about that one.
I try to get a little handle on the different rangers that I'm going to interview, and I know that you received the Harry Yount Award, and I was searching it out a little bit, but that's a pretty distinguished award in the Park Service. And can you tell me when you got it and how that nomination came and what it means to you?
Well, at first the nomination was a mystery. Every year there's a call comes out from the Washington office for nominations for the Harry Yount Award. Harry Yount was the first National Park Ranger Harry Yount was the first national park ranger hired in Yellowstone National Park, which is the first national park. And so they obviously named the award in honor of Harry. And one day in February of 2006, we were just reported for duty at 8 o'clock. The chief ranger comes into the squad bay and very sternly says, "Everybody in my office now." And we're like, uh-oh, what have we done? So we went in there, and all of a sudden he starts smiling and laughing and says, "I want you to listen to this phone message." So he pulls up his voicemail on speakerphone, and it's the regional chief ranger saying, "I wanted to inform you that you have a regional Harry Yount Award winner on your staff." And I was the only one nominated. I almost passed out. And what it was several weeks before, our law enforcement specialist told me to come in full dress uniform, and I didn't know what it was for. So I get dressed, he sticks me up against the wall, takes a picture and says, "Thanks." And I'm like, "What's this about?" And he said, "Well, we're nominating you for the Harry Yount Award." And I'm like, "Well, man, that's cool. I'm flattered. That's something." I never thought no more about it. And then that morning, and so that following morning, or however many weeks it was, I was notified. I wasn't worth anything the rest of the day. I mean, I was floating on cloud nine. I got to go with our chief ranger to the regional chief rangers conference, where I was presented that award by the regional director. It's probably one of the top 3 most memorable occasions in my career. And there's 2 Harry Yount Award winners in this park. Myself and Larry Johnson, who I work with in science and resource management. He was a ranger also, and he got it 2 years before I did. So there's 2 of us.
What are some of the characteristics of these winners? Just a varied career, or just above and beyond the call of duty, or?
It's basically a peer nominated thing. And when you're nominated, they do cite your career. They cite what your contributions have been, differences that you've made, your appearance, your professionalism, all that sort of thing. And so when it's all said and done, there are 7 regional winners picked across the United States, and then there's 1 national Harry Yount Award winner that's picked. And I didn't get that, but that was okay, because I was satisfied with what I had, and I still don't see how I deserve it, but I'm very thankful and grateful that I was nominated.
So you're as a ranger or caretakers, and what I'd like to just ask you is, tell me about the concept of stewardship in your eyes. You know, as a I'm using that word because everyone goes back to it, or that's the word that I find in my head, that's culminated in talking to people about their jobs and their lives.
Stewardship to me means that these lands, these national parks, they're placed in our care because there's nothing else like them in the United States. In some places, like Mammoth Cave, it's the longest cave in the world. I've been fortunate that I've been entrusted to help care for and manage it so that it doesn't suffer loss. You know, a park ranger can give out 100 speeding tickets in a month, but the most satisfying is when you apprehend somebody who's doing something to the resource, writing their name on a cave wall, poaching deer, poaching ginseng, stuff like that. That gets under our skin. We don't like it. That's what we're here for. We preserve it because we want we want other people to come back in their old age, see it just like it was, as close as possible. Bring your grandkids back. They can see what you saw. Sure, there's going to be a few little changes through time, but we want to preserve it. That's what we're trusted to do. And I think we do a good job.
You've shared something about the enthusiasm you have more recently, because you're working with volunteers and giving them that satisfaction. If you have maybe a younger person or somebody who's interested, what do you look for in somebody who's interested? And then have you been able to mentor people along, and then what do you say to them if they pick your brain, Harry Young Award winner, about, how can I do this? What kind of interactions do you have with people who might want to pursue that?
Now that I'm kind of a desk jockey now, I'm not able to interact as much with the public as I did, but when I was a ranger, I got that all the time. And that's changed over time, because back in the early days when I got on permanent, and by the way, it took me 6 years. So it sometimes takes a long time to get in, because the applicants are many and the jobs are few. You had to apply on park ranger and park technician registers with the Office of Personnel Management. Now I understand it's somewhat the same, except the applications are different. You basically use resumes and so forth. But I would tell anybody, first, get a degree. The minimum is a bachelor's degree. You gotta have that. Don't expect to come out of a high school and get a permanent park service job. It usually doesn't happen. I have seen it, but it's been extremely rare. Get that degree in a natural science, a cultural resource such as history or archaeology, recreation, something like that. That's what I would tell them. Get that basic. Then also either volunteer and or apply for seasonal positions. Because once you get your foot in the door, then that tends to help build up your resume, and keep working at it. Put your nose to the grindstone and you'll be noticed. It doesn't necessarily say everybody that does that will be hired, but it increases your chances. I would also tell somebody, if they were interested in law enforcement, go to one of the seasonal law enforcement academies that's throughout the U.S. You got to pay for it, but you come out with a seasonal commission and you can do almost the same things as a fully commissioned permanent law enforcement ranger. So there's different things you can do to gain experience, but experience and a great attitude and the education are three key things I would tell anybody if they're seriously interested in the Park Service. Also, the military. I strongly recommend if somebody, if they serve in the military, we've got a lot of veterans on our staff in all divisions, and they're awesome. And so that's a great way to gain experience too.
Just thinking back on something you said about taking care of the large Florida park and the increasing training that law enforcement has had over the years. How do you work currently with, how are you seen, or how do you work collaboratively with local law enforcement, federal agent, other federals, FBI, that sort of thing? Has that changed over the years as well? And maybe you have something recently that, not naming names, but maybe there's a situation that you could share that kind of illustrates that?
Certainly. I mean, I think there's always been a partnership in the national parks with other agencies, state, local, and federal. For example, a couple of child pornography cases I had to work with the FBI with analyzing the forensic computer information.
So what does that mean? The pornographers are here and they're distributing, or they just have the materials, or?
Usually it was possession, but could be distributing. We have a Job Corps center here on the park, and in these cases it was students, and we weren't able to make a successful case because evidence was mishandled before I was able to get to it, but it happens. And again, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office to get search warrants. I got to work with the FBI specialists in computer science. You do that. You work a lot with local sheriff's offices. You work a lot with local police departments, the state police. And now National Park Rangers in Kentucky have been afforded state peace officer status. So if a park ranger and law enforcement was traveling on official duty outside the park, they observe a felony, they can take action and they can make the arrest. and then they turn it over to the locals whenever that occurs. So the teamwork is really, I think it's just gotten a whole lot better. We've responded to back up locals many times. I have several times.
Well, I've enjoyed these stories and things, and I was wondering, usually when I start coming to the end or close to the end, is there anything you want to get across, or is there any, the stories are very vivid and poignant. Is there anything that you wanted to share, either a closing thought or a couple more stories or about your work?
Well, basically, I just feel very blessed and thankful that I was able to do this. I mean, my degree is in biology. I could have had other types of jobs had I wanted them, but I went for my heart. I was in a fraternity at Western, and one day, one of my fraternity brothers and I were driving through Bowling Green, and he says, "Ed, I understand you've put in for some permanent jobs up at Mammoth Cave." He said, "Do they pay much?" And this was back around 1981, 82, and I said, "Not a whole lot." He said, "But do you love it?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "That's good." He says, "You know my family is rich." And he says, "Money is great, but," he says, "it's also brought us a lot of misery." He said, "I'm telling you, follow your heart." And I did. And I've not regretted it 1 second. I love it.
That's a good friend. Eddie, I had another thought. I just love this park as well, being now living so close to it. And, I love the fall. It's a time, when the tourists are away and I can just drive up here and park the car and go for a run or go for a walk. And I think that's one of my favorite times of the year. So I don't know, what are your favorite times of the year?
I agree. It's my favorite too. I remember back when we had more flexibility to get out into the resource a whole lot more, I'd be assigned to backcountry patrol, and I'd check out a four-wheel drive vehicle, and I would have to go out and drive some of the fire roads, and part of the trail system are along roads. And I always loved it, especially if it was a Saturday, the leaves were changing. I would be driving around, and I'd stop in at one of the local small groceries, and they'd fix me a sandwich, get some chips and a drink. And there's this one place I'd always go. I would drive out the Turnhole Spring Trail on the north side, and when you get out there, it's basically a peninsula that you can sit and look out the left and right of the vehicle and look straight down almost to the river below you, because it makes a big horseshoe. And I would go out there on those fall days. That's where I had my lunch. It was awesome. And then another thing we did was river patrol. We have patrol boats here, and I got to do that quite a bit because of my experience at Everglades running boats. And so in the fall, oh man, get out on the river. You make a few contacts, but you are out there. The air is crisp. It was beautiful, blue skies. Those are the best memories.
Are a lot of people fishing at that time of year?
A few. Mainly a few canoers and kayakers, but a lot of times I almost had the river to myself. It was awesome.